So here we are once again. From the fairly balanced set 12 meta, we've come to a point where we have 3 dominant decks running the meta. Today we're going to be going over one of them, Youthberk. Although initial impressions of Full Blast were middling to say the least, the support that was revealed after made the deck a top tier contender. So let's do this again. We'll go over the deck, what makes it strong, and how you can beat it. So unlike the last How to Beats, Youth has actually been around for a while. The release of Tempest gave the deck a stint of relevancy during the set 7 to 8 meta before being power crept out of the meta. Since a lot of these cards have already been out for a while, we're going to zip past them in order to get to the new support. Starting where we always do, the ride line. Youth still plays its normal ride line. Riding to grade 2 lets you Soul Blast 1 to either add a Youthberk or call a grade 2 or less from the top 3 cards. And riding to grade 3 lets you CB1 to add a grade 2 or greater from the drop zone to your hand. Youthberk himself has 2 skills. The first is the Revolve Dress ability, which allows Youthberk to rewrite into its Revolve forms and attack with the Vanguard again with Drive -2. Youthberk can also discard a card in order to check the top 3 cards and either add a Revolve form or call grade 2 or less unit, with the remaining cards going to the bottom of the deck. Next, let's go over the cards, or should I say card that stayed in the deck. The only card that Youth continues to play from previous sets is Sequana. She serves as the main Vanguard booster as her 10k boost makes it difficult to guard Vanguard swings. When you Revolve form, she puts herself into the soul to set Youthberk's drive back to 1, allowing any Revolve form to perform a drive check and some of them to have twin drive, giving a total of 3 to 4 drive checks every turn. Let's continue by reviewing the cards from set 13 that accelerated the deck to top tier status. There's no better place to start than with Youthberk's Revolve form, Full Blast. When this Revolve form is used, you can CB1 and get effects depending on which Revolve forms you have in the soul. Having Zest in the soul gets you +1 crit, Gust gives you +1 drive, and Tempest lets you bot deck a rear guard. If you have all 3 in the soul, all front row units will gain an extra 15k for the turn. When this card was revealed, it seemed that Youth wouldn't be able to achieve this until turn 4 if they were lucky. However, the support that was announced soon after made it clear that this would be achievable by turn 3 fairly consistently. This means that the opponent can experience a burst of power before they even reach grade 3. Next up, we have Wish of Exhaustment for Gosa, a grade 2 that when it's placed on rear lets you Soul Blast 1 to search a deck or drop for a Revolve form and put it into the soul. Then, if you have all 3 Revolve forms in your soul, you can Soul Blast a non-Revolve form card to draw a card. Additionally, whenever you Revolve Dress, she gains another 5k. As you can probably guess, this is our main method of accelerating the Full Blast condition. This card is all upside and has no restrictions. The ability to add from drop, that means that even drawing into one of the Revolve forms is not a problem. Lastly, we have Bard of the Brave Instrument, Corino. When he's placed on rear from deck or discarded, you search your deck or drop for a Revolve form and add it to your hand. Then, put a card from your hand into the soul. So this card is basically 4 more copies of Fergosa. While seeing the conditions and the steps taken are a little bit different, the end goal is essentially the same. Seeing any combination of 3 Corinos or Fergosa meets the conditions for Full Blast. Not to mention that you don't always have to put the card you search into the soul, meaning you can add a Full Blast to your hand and put a different Revolve form into the soul. Add to that the fact that these are not grade 3s, and you get early game deck thinning and setup. So the main strengths of Youthberk are deck thinning. 2 cards in the deck pull dead cards out of the deck. Youth also calls out normal units and puts the rest back into the deck, making it that much easier to hit triggers on both offense and defense. Next up, it also experienced a massive power spike on turn 3, and unlike a lot of the cards in Overdress, it's not restricted to your opponent being on grade 3. Add to that the combo is extremely easy to achieve, and we have a fairly consistent, huge push on that turn 3. And lastly, having large hands. The fact that Youthberk is able to superior call and perform 3 to 4 drive checks every single turn means that they can conserve cards in hand and amass new ones. When it comes to analyzing the main weak points of Youthberk, it becomes apparent that its greatest strength is also its most glaring flaw. As we've seen, Youth is extremely consistent, but this consistency comes at a cost. The deck is almost entirely comprised of combo pieces. Granted, these pieces accomplish what they need to do, but once the job is done, they exist as barely warm bodies. For the price of consistency, Youthberk has lost access to all relevant rearguards. No Dolbreg, no Spiral Cutie, not even Schneisel. All of Youthberk's strength is focused on the center line. As long as you're able to stave off that pressure, you don't have anything to worry about from the other 2 lanes, aside from large numbers of course. Do also note that the deck plays a large amount of grade 3 units in the form of the 9 to 10 revolt forms. This can lead to phantom hands in some cases. However, do note that due to the nature of the deck, these pieces are quickly filtered out of the deck, making it less likely that they end up dead in the hand. Damage denial. This one is a possible option to go for, but probably won't be very effective. While Full Blast does technically require a CB, nothing else does. Short of players playing Cabre, they will have more than enough CB to spare. The only way to CB deny effectively is to keep them at 0 until you're ready to take a Full Blast turn, which is pretty difficult in Standard. The only deck realistically capable of pulling this off is Prison. Alternatively, you could hope that they use their CB on something else like the grade 2 Youthberk, leaving them open to denial. However, most players can easily play around this, and Youth technically still has options such as Gust to get around it. Early Rush. As we noted in the weakness section, Youthberk has lost all access to any relevant rear guards. Another side effect of this is that Youthberk has a non-existent early game. This means that any sort of early game aggression can quickly get out of control for the Youth player. A deck like Mushi King that can throw up big numbers from the start of the game will have an easy time dispatching Youth. Unfortunately, the vast majority of decks aren't fully equipped to hit the ground running. Also note that aggression can reduce your offensive pressure later in the game and makes it more difficult to tank the Full Blast turn. Assuming you're able to live your next turn, you'll probably have only one turn to finish the job, as you'll most likely have exhausted all of your resources. Guard early. This is probably the best option. Guarding early against Youth has always been the way to counteract the surge of aggression. Keeping some 15k guards in your hand allows you to know or OT to pass the Vanguard. Given the current landscape of the meta, I would recommend keeping any PGs you see in your opening hands. The less damage you take in the early game, the easier it is to tank in the mid game. If any rares get calls, you can potentially attack in them to CB deny or stave off the aggression. The one thing you do need to be wary of is any Sequanas. Put behind the Vanguard, they make it difficult to guard in the early game. High shield value. One of the biggest issues with Standard at the moment is the lack of powerful defensive options. That being said, there are still a few options when it comes to deck building to brace your deck against the wave of aggression coming from the big 3. First off are the cats from set 12. These little guys are absolutely fantastic, and I would recommend trying to fit them into every deck that you can. Next up, if your deck can afford it, play fronts. Just like the cats, having a 20k shield makes awkward numbers that much easier to guard. Additionally, if you're not using your Regalius piece slot, you could add an Evergreen Transfer. 25k goes a long way and is a 1-card 1 to pass. On the note of 25k guards, we may finally be in a meta that calls for counter heals, specifically the counter crit heals. That'll make it easier to guard the Full Blast swing. Lastly, if you're truly desperate, set 13 introduce a Youth counter for every nation. These are counterplace blitz orders. Each one has a different condition, but they all serve as 15k shields that become 30k shields if the Vanguard was placed by a card effect this turn. These cards are unfortunately not created equal, but serve as good counters to Youthberk and any Masks deck. For example, a Full Blast on turn 3 is swinging for 28. Adding an extra 30k shield puts you to 40 to 43, which is a 1-card 2 to pass. However, you won't always be facing these decks, so in these cases this card becomes much worse. It is still a 15k shield, so it isn't the end of the world, but you may be better off playing other cards. Removal. If you remember, Youthberk's biggest weakness is a lack of good rearguards. The easiest way to exploit this is to remove their rearguards. This forces them to call progressively worse and worse rearguards, and they will call them. Remember that Full Blast gives front row rearguards power, so they'll need a full front line in order to make the most of this effect. Forcing them to use grade 1 instead of grade 2 or 3 is a huge difference in guarding. An 8k with 15k power only reaches 23, which is an easy 1-card guard. That being said, most decks don't have access to easy removal, so if you'll end up having to attack into them most of the time. The best time to do this would be when you're in a situation where you wouldn't be able to finish them off anyway. Luck. As we've seen, Youthberk is a combo deck, which leaves it vulnerable to the weakness of a combo deck in any other game. It's entirely possible that Youthberk can't find his combo pieces and misses out on the turn 3 kill. Do remember that this deck plays a Garnet, a card you don't want to draw. Even if this happens, you shouldn't really breathe a sigh of relief yet. Youth is still a fairly competent deck even without Full Blast, and if they miss it on turn 3, they're almost certain to get it by turn 4. Going first also makes Youth that much more manageable. The rearguards in Youthberk scale in increments of 5, meaning that there's a huge difference taking a full blast turn when you're on grade 2 than on grade 3. So that's going to be it from me. Hopefully what you've learned here can help you counter the youth players you'll undoubtedly be going up against. Join me next time when we'll take a look at the other big threats of the Set 13 meta. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss when that drops. Like and comment on the video if you enjoyed it, or check out some of the other videos I've done on the channel. I mostly do commentated fight videos if that's your jam, but I'll see you guys in the next one.